I do see that Commissioner May is here tonight. Thank you for attending the meeting. I appreciate it. Candidate for Commissioner or for District Zone 2, Ken Strickland is here. Am I missing anybody? Oh, I got Bob Davis here. Thank you for coming out, sir. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's it. So we'll just jump right in from there. Do you have the? Oh, you do have the presenter with that. June, thank you. So the presentation was prepared mostly by my assistant Danielle, who actually had a baby on Monday. So she's not here with us, but that's a happy. She's not here with us because she's home with her newborn, or she might still be in the hospital actually. But she's relaxing with her new baby, enjoying that. So we're happy for her. But and I already did that. So Denzel's not here with us tonight. I'm not going to do his whole introduction slide, but he's out of state at a code enforcement conference. So that's why he's not here with us today. I think you guys probably saw city managers talking about the city's growing, just in the hopes to speed up the presentation. I'm not going to go into great detail about all the events we have. You guys are very familiar with the types of events we have here. They draw a large number of crowd. Prior to COVID, we were bringing in just over 10 million visitors a year to Volusia County, and I think we can all be, if we're being honest, we can all admit that the majority of that 10 million is coming through Daytona Beach at some point because they're here for the beach, and that's why code enforcement is so important. We got to keep the area looking nice, and we got to bring a lot of these areas up because we want to make that number grow even higher, which is why these two gentlemen are sitting over here. Sorry, you're watching me. You can go on to the next slide. So, and you weren't kidding, June. That slide looked really good on the computer, but it's a little small from that far away. So for the cases open for the third quarter, this is for the entire neighborhood services team, which includes our code enforcement team and our rental team. They opened 1,051 cases. And you can see the breakdown. So about 57% of those cases were residential property cases, and 19% of those were commercial property cases. And this is the first slide where you start to see how we changed the data. So in the past, we could never tell you, really, based on the data we had to track it, whether it was a commercial property or residential property. We knew when we went to the property whether it was, but the data wasn't in any way where we could just pull it up and generate these types of reports for you. So we changed some of that, so it's a little bit easier to present. So we're looking at that type of stuff as well. So 13% of the cases are a vacant lot, and then 10% of the cases are rental property cases. And you'll see a little sliver there, that's 1% of it is city department referrals. Those are cases that sometimes come into us because people think they're code enforcement cases, but when the inspector either investigates it, or sometimes when we just see them come in, we know they're not. They're usually like junk vehicles that people think are a code case, but it ends up being really something that law enforcement can address a lot faster than code enforcement. So we bump it over to Cortland, who's over there helping out with the food, our code liaison officer, and they get marked as law enforcement referral, and he goes out and handles them in usually about 10 days rather than going through the whole code enforcement process with it. There are other things that can appear on this slide. You won't see them. You'll see them on the side. Like there's a special events category. There are no special events cases in this quarter, mainly because we just added the special events category, and we just literally used it for the first time this weekend. So you won't see that category appear until the next quarter. I think it's the only one that's missing from there. Yeah. Next slide, please. So of those cases, and I'm sorry if the math doesn't add up exactly right because we kept having to dive back in the data. So I did some graphs and then had to find some errors and jump back in. I think I got them right. I'm pretty sure they're close, but I might be off one or two. But so of those 1,000, I think it was 1,051 cases, 448 were complaint driven, which means a customer called in, a citizen called in and said, hey, I have a complaint or an issue at a neighboring house or something I saw in the city, and they made a complaint. And if you recall, after July 1, the law changed, and it requires that we collect a name and an address from anybody calling in to make a complaint. It's a requirement. So we've had a lot of questions about that, a lot of concerns about that, a lot of upset people about that, a lot of frustrated people about that. I've had other staff, other departments want to give me complaints, upset that they've been turned away for it. And quite honestly, I've just told them that if they just direct them to us, we will collect the appropriate information and we will investigate the complaints, but we have to get the information. And the reason why is the law is very clear, and we're not going to violate the law, because if we violate the law, it's just going to open us up to a potential lawsuit, and I'm never going to put the city in that type of position. So if the law is clear that we'll do it, well, then we will do it. Of those cases, 603 were self-generated, field-generated. So that just means the inspectors saw those issues and they took action when they saw them, or in some cases it might be their supervisor saw them and called them to that location. Those sometimes show up as field-generated as well. So you can go on to the next slide if you would. Wow. Something happened to our graph there. Can you go to the next slide real quick? Okay, go back for me. So you can't see this, and that's because the slide got messed up, or the graph got messed up somehow. I hope that didn't happen to all of them. But I'll read it to you anyways. So for the quarter, the team closed 1,101 cases. And the status that those cases closed in, man, the numbers aren't even there. It's going to be almost impossible. Mark, do you have the numbers on the sheet there? Is it? Here, hang on one second. Just skip it. So this slide just kind of shows our trend compared to the previous 2 years. So you'll see the red line indicates 2020, the gray line indicates 2019, and the yellow line indicates 2021. And what I think is most interesting about this graph and what I discussed with the supervisors is that the yellow line is getting a lot smoother. And that's actually an indicator that what we're doing, the changes we're making, the training that we're giving the inspectors, the things that we've been working with them on is starting to smooth out some of the caseload. And that's really starting to stabilize the workflow a little bit, which has been one of our overarching goals. And they're starting to really take ownership over the cases and take ownership over trying to understand what we're asking them to do. And because they're doing that, you're starting to see where the workflow, it may not be those peaks where they're not always hitting the goal we need them to hit, but there's an even flow of them trying to give an honest day's worth of work and trying to get the work done the right way. And that's what we're asking them to do, because we're asking them to change, in a lot of cases, because some of these folks have been here for a while, we're asking them to change the entire way that they're working cases that they've been working their entire life. Or their entire career. So, sometimes that comes with some growing pains. So, we're working through that, and I like that line evening out, and now that it's evening out, then hopefully we'll see it creep a little bit, and then just find our happy spot. Next one. And so these are closed cases, so you will still see a little bit of jogging in here, but usually not this. You can see it starting to even out a little bit as well. Same colors for the same years, but the jogging will still occur because we are always continuously cleaning cases, meaning the supervisors review and I review the cases every month. We pull a type of report, we call it a 63 report, and we evaluate where the inspectors are each month. Are they keeping up with their cases? Do certain cases need to be looked at? If they do, we dive into them, we look for details, and we make sure that they're on track. And if they're not on track, we address it with them. We talk to them about it, we see if they need something. If they need something, we try to help them with it. If it's just they're not understanding something, we try to help them with the understanding of it. If something's just broken, we just try to fix it. Because that's happened too. Sometimes our database just breaks and it just doesn't work right. We just have to work with IT. So, next slide. Okay, so this was the slide. It changed too. Yeah. So, okay, but It's okay, because we got the number, so I can at least read it. So these are closed cases for the third quarter for the team overall. And you can see the types over here on the side here. These are the statuses in which, these aren't the types, I'm sorry, these are the statuses in which the cases were closed. So the first status you can see is duplicate. This is a category that we added in because when I took over code, I was finding that we had a lot of cases that I was like, what happened on this case? And you wouldn't have really notes in there, and it would just be closed. And then you'd ask somebody, and they'd be like, oh, go back and look at the property, and there's another case. That's why it was closed, because you don't want to have two cases on the same property when it's the same violations. And I'd be like, okay, well, that doesn't really make sense. Like, we shouldn't be getting credit for two things. You don't really want to do that. So we started to try to taper that down. And what I did in order to be able to work on tracking that and trying to deal with that issue is we created a category to close those out as duplicate. And what we discovered was, even as we suspected actually, was that this is probably being overused, and even 12 is probably a little high. And we've actually come up with a strategy during these 5 days to really probably eliminate the need for duplicate. It may still be used occasionally from time to time, because you never know what kind of anomalies might pop up. But we found a way to recycle the case numbers through our support staff to just reissue it to another case. So that's what we're doing now going forward. So that way, there's not a duplication of credit for cases that somebody just accidentally opened in error. At the end of the day, I don't feel like the team should get credit for cases that we just opened in error. Whether it's support staff member just accidentally hit the button to add a case, or whether an inspector's out in the field and bumped their iPad and something opened up, we really should just not get credit overall for that, because you see 12, but I'm telling you right now, I know I probably recycled 20 cases, and Mark, he probably did another 20 himself. So you can imagine that's 40 cases right there that just were nothing. You can see the next category is unfounded. This is 156. That's that lighter blue. This lighter blue section up here, and what you can't really see from the screen, because it's a little blurry, is it's about 14% of the cases that we close were closed as unfounded. What that means is that an inspector got a case, they got a complaint, the complaint came in, they went out, and the complaint that was given to them, and they never found a violation. They didn't see it. It was either gone. Often these are something that's momentary, like a parking violation, something like parking on the grass, something that moves or changes quickly. And usually what should be happening, that also should mean that when they arrived at that location, they also found no other code violations either, because they all know that when they get a complaint and they go to a house, there's two things they do. They evaluate the whole property from the street all the way up to the roof for any code violations, whether they're there for a car or a roof or whatever it is. They look at it for any code violations while they're there, because they're already there, so they might as well make good use of their time. And then they do what's called a Rule of 6. And they do Rule of 6, which is they look at the neighboring house on either side, and then they look at the 3 across the street. And they evaluate whether there's any code complaints on those. And they only do that Rule of 6 on complaints. And all unfounded cases should be complaints, because I would hope that no inspector is field generating something that's unfounded. That'd just be weird. So, the next category is the forwarded to PD. That's ones like we talked about with Cortland. You'll see forwarded to PW, which means Public Works. Sometimes we get road issues that people think are code related. We just forward them on to Public Works to get corrected. Your biggest category, which is this big green slice of the pie here, this is compliance. Now, I will be honest with you. The size of this pie will change when we rerun the numbers for the year, because we had a little miscommunication between us and staff about what compliance and compliance after finding means. So we know that when we go back and look at some of those compliance cases, there's probably, I'm going to guess, maybe 25% that are really compliance after finding. But the point of the story is, most cases are closed to compliance before they ever have to get to hearing. And that's a good thing. That means when people get a letter from us, they fix the issue. And that's 71% of the time. I know you guys can't see that because the percentages were supposed to, I mean, they really were black, and they were bigger for you guys, but I don't know what happened there. So that, it's 71% of the time people fix it on that first, maybe not right away, but they fix it on the first notice before they ever have to get to hearing. Next one is, you'll see 2 will find, which is a little small sliver, which I don't even see it so small, but the 2 will find means they did not come into compliance by the deadline that was set in the first notice, but they did come into compliance before they got to the hearing, but because it was either something that's routinely repeats or something that we felt might repeat, we took it all the way to the hearing anyways and asked the magistrate for what we call a will find, which is just simply a finding from them stating, yes, it was once in non-compliance, you did not meet the deadline to correct it, and you have now since corrected it after the deadline. And that order, what that order does for us, in case you're wondering why we would take that time to do all that, what that order does is it gives us the ability to bring them back immediately to the magistrate if it repeats, and it allows us to be able to bring them back for an enhanced penalty. So normally when we bring them before the magistrate, you have to bring them once for a finding of noncompliance, and then the second time you can ask for a fine, and the most that fine would be $1,000 per day. And when you have a will find in place, for example, or a finding of noncompliance previously on a case, it changes the game. That means if they ever do the violation again, you can immediately bring them back to the magistrate without giving them time to correct the issue. You still got to tell them to correct it, but you can bring it right back to the magistrate at the next meeting, and you can ask for a fine up to $5,000 for each occurrence that it occurs. So occurrence is a loosely defined term, so it's what we kind of set it. So if it's a parking lot and they got 100 cars in it, we could theoretically come in and argue that we want $5,000 for every car in the parking lot. Or we could say we want it for every day that the issue is occurring. So it just gives us a lot of latitude to address issues based on how we need to, ramp up our enforcement to get the corrective nature that we need to occur. The next category, which is this darker blue category here, it's 5% of the cases is compliance after finding. So if you add that with the 71%, you're talking about 76% of our cases come into compliance. The difference here is the compliance after finding means they once stood in front of the magistrate at least one time, and or the code board, and they found them in non-compliance. And again, the only difference is that if they ever repeat that same violation, well, I shouldn't say ever. If they repeat that violation, I think it's 5 years. Is it 5 years? If the same owner of that property repeats that violation within 5 years, we can bring it back to that enhanced penalty. We have a other category on there. It says 8. We really try not to use other. It's on there because we have some anomalies that pop up that are just weird things that we end up having to close, like cases that just oddly get dismissed by the magistrate or things like that. The last category is liens. That's all our liens. There's 79 that we got 79 liens in this quarter. You won't see, it's hard to really see how many liens you get in a quarter. So 79 liens in a quarter when you're reporting the quarter only a month after it ended, or less than a month after it ended, that's quite a few liens actually. And that's probably, I would say, largely short-term rental liens because they're so immediate, because they're irreparable and irreversible. They go usually to a hearing the next month. You can go to the next slide. Okay, before I turn it over to Mark for his part of just the code team, does anybody have any questions about those slides that you just saw there? Not about that, not about properties in any of the districts, because we're going to give you an opportunity to ask about properties in the districts, but any of the information that you just saw, if I need to clarify anything. Okay, great, awesome. Was it better than last time? Is it looking better? Sue's giving me one of these. Emily's giving me a yes. So, all right, Mark, you're up. Oh, you got a microphone. Perfect. You can do it, Cassini.
Yes, I oversee the responsibilities for the 10 code inspectors that we have. I go over what we did in the last quarter. During the third quarter, the code enforcement team opened 944 cases. Of those that the captain talked about, we break them out into residential. 63% of the cases that they opened were residential, 21% were commercial. We had 15% of our cases were vacant lots, and then we had the cases that we ended up referring from other departments, just to 1%. This gives, it's a little hard to see this slide, but what it does is it brings down now the subtypes for those commercials that you saw, the commercial properties. We had 50 that had no subtype assigned. Those would typically be the ones we went out and there was, they were unfounded because a call came in, we went out and investigated it. We didn't have a subtype because we never found a violation. We had in commercial properties 2 life safety. One thing we do is we rate these as to what we consider is most severe. For us, the first violation that we consider the worst is life safety. That could be in a commercial property, no smoke detectors, could be boarding up windows, doors, this type of thing. And those we take very seriously.
And that's how this list goes completely through. You'll see this throughout the entire presentation, and we talked to the inspectors about that, so they know to categorize their property. So if they have a life safety issue, but they also have a vehicle violation on the property, they will always select the life safety issue as the subcategory, meaning that it's the priority, so that will remain the subcategory for that case, for the life of that case. Just because that's where it started and that's where it'll stay. And so it goes life safety, work without permit, building maintenance exterior structure, building maintenance interior structure. Then it goes property maintenance exterior property. And then it goes vehicle and business violations. And these are terms that we take in. With these 3 terms in the middle, these are terms that we took directly from the IPMC. And that's, those are the larger grouping terms. That there's several different violations that can exist within those categories, those groupings, I should say. Go ahead, Mark, I'm sorry, jumped all over you.
No, that's okay. What we had on commercial properties, we had 10 properties that were doing work without permits. We had building maintenance exterior, that was in one of our largest categories, that was 68. Now that is the condition of the building itself. This could be peeling paint, broken windows, these type of items. We then have building maintenance interior, as you see, there's only 9 on the commercial properties. We don't typically do much investigation in the commercial properties in the interior. We had property maintenance on the exterior. Now that would be landscaping, these type of items that are addressed on the outside of the property. And then we have vehicles. We do break them out separately for property maintenance, exterior, because we want to track the complaints for vehicles on the property. And lastly, we have business violations on commercial. That would be someone that is doing a business without a business license.
And often that interior category is going to be a lot lower anyways. I realized that when we were going through the data, because often a property that has interior violations also has exterior violations, so it's always going to get that higher category of an exterior violation. And main reason that exterior violation category is higher is that those are the categories in the IPMC that are really just more elevated of concern. They're the things that are more structural or they're safety related. Like there's like the oddball one that me and Mark were discussing is that's the category that concludes premise numbers, which doesn't really seem like it's all that big of a concern. But when you think about the fact that if you don't have premise numbers on your house, the ambulance can't find you if you have a medical issue, or the police can't find you if you summon the police, you know, that becomes a significant issue if somebody needs help and they can't get to you.
The next slide is the residential properties. We again had 51 with no subtype, which would have been ones that we found that were unfounded. We had 6 life safety in the quarter, 30 work without permits, and 39, I guess, 30. 57 exterior building maintenance. We then had interior, 6 building maintenance on the interior of the structures, and then you can see we had a very high number of exterior of the properties. These are where we're getting complaints or the inspectors are finding yards aren't being maintained, hedges growing over sidewalks, this type of thing. So you get a lot of your property maintenance there. Could be outside storage, could be trash and debris. Those are the type of things that we put in that property maintenance exterior category. We also had in the quarter 111 violations for people parking their vehicles improperly. This could be a car, a boat, a travel trailer, not parking them where they're allowed to be parked. And then we had 2 business violations. So of those cases, 399 were complaint driven. That's where someone called in or emailed in a complaint. But the nice number that you see there is 545 were field generated. Those are ones where the inspectors found the violations while they were out in their area, and they're locating violations that they then turn in. You can see on the graph how that works out.
And we're pretty consistently right around 60%. It seems like that's really right around where we usually are at. I think last quarter, I think we might have been 62% proactive or field generated, and that's where we really want to be, because especially when we moved into a spot where people can't make complaints without leaving their name and their address, it leaves people feeling like they can't report stuff. So we know there's an onus on us to be in the neighborhoods, finding violations and addressing those violations.
And this goes a little bit about the activity per the inspector, the cases that they did. As you can see, they're a little hard to see definitely from the distance. I can read them where you're looking at John Baptiste, maybe we call him. He has had 84 cases. Inspector Wiggins had 109. Inspector Garcia, 124. Inspector Stenson, 84. Inspector Yates, 81. Inspector Boswick, 112. Inspector Fitzgerald, 74. Inspector Butler, 101. Inspector Kurt, 85. And Inspector Clegg, 73. And we'll go through a little bit more of a breakdown of their cases as we go on with each individual inspector.
Okay, so I know several people here have heard this presentation a lot, so I'm not going to go through the entire introduction for each inspector. And ma'am, if you want, I'll give you this copy here so that you have it for future reference. Can anyone give it to her, or she can follow along? But basically, these slides provide the duties and responsibilities and the background for the inspectors, their history and their knowledge on the field. And so the first up is Inspector Tom Clegg. Go ahead, Tom.
During the quarter, I opened up 62% residential. During the third quarter, I opened up 78 cases. Of the 78, 62% were residential and 38% were commercial. Majority of that was building maintenance on the exterior, along with the property maintenance on the exterior. No subtype,
Yeah, and I think Mark started talking about this a little bit, but the no subtype is going to be a mix of unfounded, because when they go, if there's no violation, they can't tell what the violation would have been. They're just going to leave it blank. But also it could just be that the case was so new that they haven't had a chance to go out and do a thorough inspection of the property and enter all the violations. And because they haven't entered the violations yet, there's not been any selection as to what the violations are and hasn't moved to a category yet.
On the residential side, it was building exterior structure, 22 cases, vehicles, 14, and those subtype guns. 78 cases open, 52 were complaint driven, and 29 field generated. I got a compliance of a total of cases of 61 cases, 26 were open and closed in the third quarter, compliance of 49.
Well, hang on, go back a second. Let's cover everything there. Compliance was 49, 10 were unfounded, and 2 were liens, so it's pretty quick to get the 2 to lien in a quarter, so. Well, I'm sorry, I should say that closed cases don't mean that they were open and closed in the same quarter. It just means that they were closed during the quarter, so those were just, I guess I said that wrong, yeah.
This case here at 128 South Beach, I think a place is called Zappos, it's an Italian restaurant. He was closed for a while. He had, as you see in the top left there, vegetation growing on it, mildew, dirt grime, and he did an outstanding job completely putting not only the north side but the whole building, and he's open for business again.
Okay, Curtis, if you want, you can just stand by your chair there if you can read it from there. If not, you can come up closer if you need to. Oh, you guys have the sheets, right? Yeah, so if you're in the front row, you can stay seated even if you want. If you're in the back row, sorry guys, you gotta stand up. It's a poor selection on your part. Curtis, go ahead.
First of all, how's everybody doing? All right, during the third quarter of 2021, I opened up 109 cases.
And so you can see, I'm gonna help him with the percentages, because I don't know if you can you see it on your sheet?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I got 69% was residential, 30% was commercial, and 1% was vacant lot.
So for the most part, the only inspector you should see with vacant lots is Danny Garcia. So you will notice that the other inspectors may have like really small percentages or no vacant lots. And you'll see when you get to Danny works vacant lots citywide, that's his responsibility. And the inspectors are still in the process of, that was the change that occurred at the beginning of the year, they're still in the process of learning that process. So sometimes they end up with a vacant lot case that they have open, and they kind of so far in with it, it couldn't be transferred over to Danny, so we just kind of leave it with them. And that's the case with this one. I think it's like one case, yeah. But
The commercial property subtypes, I had 4. Zero work without permit. The building maintenance exterior structure, I had 14. Building maintenance interior, I had 1. Property maintenance exterior property, I had 12. 1 vehicle and 1 business violation.
And if you're sitting there going like, I know there's more vehicle violations out there than that, just remember that often when there's a vehicle violation of the house, there's also landscape and other issues, and it's one of those ones that rolls up into another one. So,
All right.
just 1 second, and when we get to them, go ahead, you're up first.
Residential property subtypes, I had 3 no subtype, 0 life safety, 4 with work without permit, 23 was building maintenance exterior. I had 2 building maintenance interior, 34 property maintenance exterior property, 9 vehicles, and 0 business violations. Of those 109 cases open, 87 was field generated, and 22 was complaint driven, with 79.8% was field generated and 20.2% was complaint driven. I closed a total of 104 cases. 75 cases were open and closed in the third quarter of 2021. Compliance, I had 97. The duplicate case, I had 1, 6 unfounded. And here's a before and after picture. It's on Fairview. It was dirt and grime on the building and also outside storage. And there's the before picture and there's the after picture.
Okay, next up is Kevin Yates. Kevin's got this north end, actually it's a zone we're in here right now, so, go ahead, Kevin, you're up.
All right, as you can see, I've done this going to the city 2 years now. For the third quarter, I opened a total of 81 cases, 23% in commercial and property maintenance, and the 74% residential, with 3% being city referrals. Of commercial properties, the majority are falling in the unsigned category, followed up by building maintenance exterior and property maintenance exterior. And a few work without permit.
So I think there's a bit of an anomaly there, right? Because Kevin just had a baby, so he's catching up. Yeah, so some of those unassigned, I suspect they're just ones that when he first got back here, he's been attacking some of the lingering cases that sat while he was out for several weeks. So there's some cases that he hadn't had a chance to visit and get caught up, but he's caught up, and I would guess even some of those are already been categorized, quite honestly.
As far as residential, you'll see the majority are going to be in exterior property maintenance, followed by exterior structure, with a few vehicles and no permits. Once again, the reason for you don't see as many vehicles is generally there are multiple violation cases. All right, of my 81 cases, 64% were complaint driven and 35% field generated. For the quarter, I closed 120 cases, with 47 of those cases being opened and closed within the same quarter. You'll see compliance is the majority of the way that was resolved, but also a few court cases and liens and several unfounded. This is a property on Peninsula that has sort of fallen into disrepair. The owner said they really didn't spend much time outside the property and wasn't aware. But once we started working together, you can see they really turned it around. They did some roof work, new paint, and it almost looks like a new building.
Next up is JB. JB has the CRA on the beachside area, so basically it's we extended one street. So his sea breeze going all the way down to ISB. Go ahead, JB.
Hi, folks. Let's start. All right. So, as it says here, for the third quarter, I opened 4 cases. As you can see, there's really broken down property with commercial properties, vacant lots, and residential properties. First to the draft. All right, so field generated. Most of a lot of my cases are field generated, as you can see there. Since July, our numbers went down to improvement. That is not probably still there, but usually in the field of the drop rides and so that's one of the biggest things. And because I have the ISB, because I have the mall there on the beach side, I tend to drive to those a lot, so that's where a lot of these cases are from. And a lot of these come from. One thing that was expected is that I have a lot of tenants that are applying for issues with their landlords, simply because the landlord is not helping them as much as possible. So that's also something that I've been tasked with, and I've been diligent at sending notices to just about every owner that's on the property appraisal office to make sure that whatever issues these folks are having, that it gets resolved. So,
JB, I was going to ask you to talk about that a little bit. So can you just, can you elaborate for the group? And I think you might have touched on it last quarter. But I know that one of the struggles you've had with this zone and what seems to be slowing down the process a little bit is the notice requirement that the law has for you and the difficulties you have with the fact that, I mean, even when people call you because they've somehow found out about the violation, when the letter shows up for them to sign, they refuse to sign for it.
So here's last time I was here, I stated that I foresaw that there was an issue coming because I would send out notices and they would come back unclaimed. And we can't just say, hey, if you have a violation, we have to send you a 30-day notice, time to take care of it. However, what's happening is because a lot of folks in my area are, it's not owner occupied, they are renting out those spaces. And so what's happening is because of, as the captain was mentioning, because of our system of having a front-facing interface where you can see what's happening in your area and what's happening in your address, these folks, as soon as, once I send a notice, they get a green card from the post office. They don't sign it, but they're not aware that there is a case. So they will go to the website, see what the case is about. At that point, they call me, and we have a conversation. So now in my head, I'm assuming they received a green card and everything is great. However, because they did not sign that green card, no matter what conversation we had, it doesn't matter because they need to acknowledge they received that green card. And so what's happening is they're now prolonging the process. What should have been a 30-day is now I have to recite and send another thing. But in order to think that we can post. So what I've been doing is, rather than just sending the 30-day notice, hoping I hear back, I'm sending a 30-day notice and I'm posting their property immediately that very same day. Which the process is longer for me, but at the end it saves me time from having to deal with this property over and over and over. So that's the issue that I've been dealing with, and that's the best way to deal with it because some of these folks, they're smart. They know that they're not going to take care of the problem. So the best thing they do is just look it up and tell me they will be, but they haven't done anything. And then I don't have any recourse because I can't take them to court because they never officially received the notice. So that's the battle that's been going on specifically in Lexington.
Yeah, he's been pretty frustrated about it. It's, they just are very savvy, so they play along like, oh yeah, I'll get on it, and yeah, I'm gonna take care of it for you. And then, so he thinks everything's great is going on. He jumps back in his case. He realizes, I still haven't got that green card back. So he checks the U.S. Postal, and it shows up undelivered and it just unsigned for. And it's like, well, now those things sit out there and linger. Because just for the fact that they just delayed in not signing the green card, it's delayed in another 30 days. So by the time he finds that out, that's probably another 60 days. So they're pretty smart about it. So he's gotten smart too and said, hey, I'm gonna take all that out of the equation. He's following a similar model that Cliff follows with his short-term rentals. It says, hey, I'm doing it all the same day. Boom. And we're starting the clock today. You're either getting it done or you're not, and then we'll see where we're going from there.
That's what fits my mirror.
Can you see those from over there? What do you?
For 69 cases and 19 cases were open and closed within that same quarter. And as you can see, cases, unfounded cases, findings after finding other. So that's how it's broken down. But yeah, I'm working as fast as possible to get things open and closed and taking care of problems. So I made the news for this one. So that was something. As you can see, the way the fences are, the person did not want to take care of it, even though it was obvious. But at the end, they ended up taking care of it. Observation does happen, folks, if you live on the beach side. That's just nature. But it was taken care of, so it looks a lot better now.
I'm sure this won't be the last time you make the news. It's just that your zone makes the news all the time. So.
This is another one where, if you're familiar, that's right on the beach side of 171 Atlantic. That property was, they weren't technically shut down, but they were closed for a long period of time. And it was simply in bad shape. And this was one where, same thing, I posted it, assuming things were gonna be taken care of, nothing ever happened. And then, you know, I had to repost months later. I can't see it from the picture, but you can see months later. And then they finally take care of it. So that's the process.
Okay, Mark Bostwick. He is the south end zone on the peninsula. You're up, buddy.
Good evening, everyone. In the third quarter of 2021, I opened up 100.
You gotta hold that thing close. You know you're a soft speaker already.
I opened up 112 cases in the third quarter. 93% were residential property, 6% was commercial, 1% was a city department of labor. All right, the commercial property subtypes, the majority of those were the building maintenance, exterior structure, and followed up by the building maintenance, interior structure. Residential properties, a total of 53. That was the building maintenance, exterior structure. 25 were property maintenance, exterior property. 21 were vehicles. In the third quarter, 17 of my cases were complaint driven, 95 was field generated.
Yeah, I think this went up for you, right? I mean, you were already high on field generated, but did this jump probably
Yeah,
10, 15%?
yeah, I believe so. I think,
I suspect that's because the people don't want to give their name and thing. But, yeah.
I have noticed that is they're worried about that when I run into people on the streets, they're like, well, you know, you gotta call in now, and they're like, they're a little hesitant. All right, in the third quarter, I closed a total of 111 cases. 46 cases were open and closed in the third quarter. 94 of those were compliance. 3 were compliance after finding. 4 was a lien was found. All right, here's a before and after at 130 Harrison. Before and after.
So, before and after. That was impressive. You had them fertilize the yard even. Like most people just mow the grass and leave it. You know, paint it. Looks great. There's nothing. You got nothing. That's great. That's awesome. Good job.
The picture spoke for itself, so I just wanted to let everybody
You are correct. The photo did.
see all the hard work all the code inspectors try to do for the beautiful city of Daytona Beach. All right, this is 322 Hillside. This property, you just have a bunch of dirt and ground on the exterior, and I just have to pressure wash it, and that's before and after shot. One is Ravello Boulevard, no, 405 Ravello. Actually, there's, the owner owns 405 and 409, so both these two houses that sat right next to each other that had just been pretty much weathered, tremendously. It's hard to see it, but if you, get up close, you can see, he painted, both properties, and they're looking good, and you want to worry about that for another 20 years. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. So before we move on to District 1, does anybody have any questions about District 2? And just for clarification, District 2 is the railroad tracks going east to the ocean. And we'd be happy to answer any questions, either for the inspectors or myself or anybody else. Yes, ma'am. Oh, Jonathan, go ahead.
She can go out first, that's fine, please do.
He's gonna bring you the mic just so everybody can hear you, sorry. Oh, thanks, Mark, sorry.
My name is Barbara, and I live at 1209 North Halifax Avenue. And recently, my neighbor sold his house at 1205. And the people that bought the house started a rental place in the Hauler dock. They had 3 pontoon boats and 2 jet skis. And I filed a complaint about it, and he came out. And he said that as long as they were licensed, that it wasn't a problem with code enforcement. Now, we have people coming down right by our house, people that we don't know, renting these boats out every day. Tonight, we were grilling out on our patio, and one of the renters came in with his boat and urinated off the dock facing us. I think this is not something the city would want to see in a residential area. And I am very concerned of how it's going to affect our property values. And I would like to know how I can address this issue.
So I think there's probably just some miscommunication or misunderstanding of what's meant by that communication chat. Real quick, Kevin, is that case open? Okay, yeah, so really what Kevin's saying is basically like, the way code enforcement is gonna approach it or address it is we're gonna send a notice to that individual and say, hey, if this activity truly is allowed here at your property, then go down and get the proper license. And what that means is that they would have to go down to permits and licensing and apply for that use at that property. Now, I can tell you that in my experience and what I know of that zone and that area, that it will most likely not be an allowable use, right? Because what would probably be allowed there would be a home-based business, and a home-based business wouldn't allow for you to be having traffic coming and going from it, and being able to store equipment there and signage and things like that. So all of the activity that you described typically would not be allowed at a residential property. So I suspect that we will most likely get to a point where we get a resolution for you, but I also suspect that if it hasn't resolved itself after we've sent the first notice, that it's likely that it will get to the point where we'll just have to drag them in front of a magistrate or a code board, and that they will have to tell them to stop or maybe even possibly fine them.
Okay, so they're allowed to continue without a license?
In the meantime, yeah, code enforcement has no power to go in and physically stop them. Yeah, we don't have, a lot of times people think that we can come in and bar houses and shut people down, or, bar businesses and things like that. We can't do that. We don't have that kind of power. The building department in some cases can condemn houses for safety reasons or things like that, but we're not the building department, and we don't have that authority. Yeah. So if you want, what I would like you to do before you leave, if you could talk to Mark Jones right here as a supervisor over the code enforcement folks, he's going to get your name and number, and we're going to do some follow-up on the case for you with Kevin as well, and we're going to just go and look at it, and there's probably another way we could probably go at it too, that we'll just look at it and see if there's something else we can apply to it, and just to make sure that it gets stopped.
Okay, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, and it's great. It's often good for us to be able to hear from folks that neighbor the properties or where there's a true impact, because that does sometimes change the facts of the case. So when there's an impact to a neighbor or there's some true harm, exactly. That's where we start to move towards something that we call irreparable and irreversible. And when you get to irreparable or irreversible, the ability to bring them right before a magistrate becomes more likely, and the ability to obtain higher fines right out of the gate also becomes more likely. So it's possible that we get to a point where we might be somewhere close to that, especially now having come to a public meeting and expressed yourself in the way that you have. Appreciate it. John? How are you, sir?
Well, thank you very much, Captain. And I do have to say thank you for the supervisor and all the inspectors for what you guys do, because it's really valuable to building our city and our community. Without you guys, we would be back to square one. So what you're doing now is you're actually changing the community for years and decades to come in the future. I do have a couple of questions. So I noticed 14 seats in front of me. Now, how many total inspectors do we have, and how many are broken down into each district?
So you're looking at all the inspectors. And let's just do it this way. If you're in District 2, stand up. It's always mess the count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we got 6 in District 2. So sit down, guys, if you would. And if you're in District 1, stand up. I think it's 6 again, isn't it? 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, Danny, you're sitting wide. You gotta sit down, buddy. Well, you cheated then. It's 5. It's 5, and am I missing somebody? 5 and 4.
14!
It's 5 and 4.
14 including Denzel.
Right. It is a total of 14, but you wanted the breakdown, right? Okay. So we have 4 in District 1. We have 5 in District 2. We have a vacant lot inspector that's citywide, and then we have 3 rental inspectors, 2 of which do long-term rental inspectors, and 1 of which does short-term rental investigations. So I believe that's a total of 13 inspectors. That's a total of, 13 inspectors. It's 14 with Mark. It's 15 with Denzel. Did I count it right?
Let's just round out to 16 or so. But wow, wow. Just imagine a city like Daytona Beach, less than 16 inspectors. If I appreciated you 2 minutes ago, I appreciate you now 100 times more. And the reason for that is you have a lot of work. Now, looking at the presentation, which, Captain, it's a great presentation. It breaks out to almost an average of 90 to 100 cases per inspector. Is that an accurate statement? Per quarter.
Per quarter. So it's a little less than that, I think. It's about right. I guess it's more like 8. It's probably about 90. Yeah, it's close. It's close.
We
Yeah.
had a couple of superstars that had a little bit higher than 105 in there.
That's true.
So
Thank goodness.
Yes. So if we're doing this, now let me ask you this, Captain. How much, I know this is a very broad question, but each case, and this could be completely different, I'm not sure if there was an average ever ran on how much time is dedicated to each independent case. Average.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. We haven't dialed in our process. So there are cases that we often find that have lingered way too long. They're just out there, they got lost and they floated. And we have to bump the folks, or they got an inspector left us and they got moved to another inspector. So it's hard to track the time frame. And it's difficult to account for time on a case. We've tried to come up with a methodology that would be able to do that. And the city is in a conversation between other departments about upgrading our software to a different type of software. And in those, a lot of those softwares that do track time on cases, or they allow us to be able to account for, just like if you do an inspection, it averages at whatever amount of time. That way, at the end, we can run a report that just generally tells us, hey, that generally takes, it's generally this amount of use of a time for city employees, because we think that's relevant to be able to show to the public, for one, and then also it's relevant when often we're asked by the magistrate, well, how much did it really cost you to investigate a case? Like, how much should I really fine these folks? Or often we get the question, why should I give you the fine you're asking for? And we have to explain the amount and the level of the amount of inspections that we went through. In some cases are a lot, in some cases are very few. I wish I had a better answer for you. I really do.
That's a great answer in its own. You know, the reason I'm asking all these questions, I think it's good to know where we stand and where we're trying to head in the future. I think from my own personal view, less than 16 inspectors for a community like Daytona Beach, with running close to 85,000 residences. 72,000, I stand to be corrected. 72,000 residences. And how many businesses do we have that's
I don't even have the count. That's part of why we started tracking stuff a little differently, because it's a little difficult to get the count sometimes.
Sure. So, I mean, we have a bunch of supermen and a bunch of superwomen sitting on those chairs with a team that's basically patrolling all these residences, all these business owners. On top of that, getting bombarded by the tourism industry every single year. And, I'm kind of speechless, because all my questions at this point, how do they even do it? I'm going to start itching my head. I do have a couple of things. Thank you for the presentation of the before and after. We should get you guys on HGTV. They do home renovations. That show, I think they would be very happy with the city of Daytona. But here's I have a couple of questions. Maybe I'm not very familiar with the code, but I noticed on some of these properties, the commercial properties, the signage. I know I travel a lot throughout, I'm based in a couple of states. I know that the signage for code enforcement, especially if you're doing the promo signs through your windows, that's a big no-no for a lot of code enforcements to different cities throughout the country. But I noticed here we have the before and the after still show those promo signage. So is it just our code?
So we do have some conflicts in our code that create some exemptions, and it's actually a topic of conversation that we plan on talking about during our city tours. We've already discussed it as staff, and it's something we want to discuss. I personally think it's one of our contributors to the clutter and kind of blight of the area, especially in our business districts. I don't want us to have to chase around signs. It's rough for us to have to address it, and it's a difficult issue for inspectors to kind of address. And we certainly never address content, if anybody ever asks that. Just so you know, that was often a question, like, what about if it says this or that? We never get into what it says. What we care about is the sign allowed? Is it a monument sign, and are they allowed a monument sign, for example? Is it a window sign, and is a window sign allowed? And promo signs is a good example, right? And my belief is the more clutter you have in an area, the more distracting things are sometimes. Those can be great for events, and they can be great for grand openings. They can be great for temporary things, but they're not great year-round, and they're not what you want when you're trying to redevelop and raise an area up. And that's what I think, that what I'm hearing from the public and what I hear from city staff and what I hear from business owners is that we want to raise the area up. So we got to stop, operating down here and start saying, hey, we're asking more of ourselves, all of us. We got to start doing a little bit more. And the simple things are, let's just take the clutter down. Let's take the clutter down, have a clean, uniform look a little bit. People walk through an area and should appreciate it. Now, my big thing when I tell the inspectors, even in residential neighborhoods, is that if you do nothing else, then when you churn that street, stop for just like a minute and look down the street, and you should feel like, man, this street just looks clean, right? So like, if the curb line's clean, the sidewalk's clean, the fence lines are clean, the yards are clean, then you feel good about the street, right? So you already have this impression. So like, if you have one house in the middle of the block that has a roof problem, you're probably going to miss it even. I'm not just talking about the inspector, but just the public. You're probably going to miss that because you had that feeling when you turned down that street of like, hey, this block looks clean, and the grass is maintained, and the sidewalks are clean and pressure washed and taken care of. So you have that immediate feeling of like, this is a good looking street. And that's why I ask them a lot of times to start, like you heard me say, when they go to a code violation, start from that curb line and go up. And you gotta rigorously address those things because that's what you're going for. Those things that people's eyes fixate on first, sometimes they seem small and they seem like you're being petty and you're picking at people, but sometimes they're the most important things you can address, like window signs. It's a perfect example.
I apologize if I'm going to take another 2 minutes asking some questions. I hope, Captain, you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Landscaping, is there a code regarding the landscaping? And I'm talking not only on commercial properties, but on residential homes. Is there a certain length? Is there a certain look for the homes?
Okay, so it's different in both scenarios. So I'll start with just residential. So residential, there's a little bit more variety in the code. There's several things you can or can't do within our code. And then there's also the International Property Maintenance Code that has some violations of things you can or can't do as well. Usually, generally speaking, it's that things need to be reasonably maintained. Dirt and grime needs to not exist. Things there needs to be it needs to be in sanitary conditions. You know, they need to be there's things that are mechanical, like a gate that needs to be maintained. It can't be broken or sagging or falling apart. A fence can't be falling apart. Those types of things, right? So those are. So if you're talking about like height, for example, like if we're going to address height, we address that. It's kind of a moving target for us a little bit because it's a reasonable target. So often reasonable is determined by the neighborhood itself, right? So if you, for example, if the grass, I guess the best way to describe it is that if your grass is being maintained, if you're maintaining your grass at 4 inches, for example, and the neighbor's maintaining their grass at 6 inches, there's really not much difference there, right? But if you're maintaining your grass at 4 inches and the neighbor's maintaining their grass at 1.5 feet, that's a big difference, right? It doesn't seem reasonable, right? But the 6 inches versus 4 inches, that's probably reasonable. And that's what the law requires, is us to make a reasonable judgment and to apply those standards reasonably. Now we do have to tell them, and often if we're going to tell them to cut it to a length, we have to tell them what we expect of them. But we do just generally, often we give them a much more broad statement about maintaining their landscape, because we usually don't get into a back and forth with folks about cutting their grass. It's usually, honestly, either they're way overgrown and they just need to mow their grass, or they're mowing it once we ask them to mow it. Is that now on the commercial side, it's totally different, but our ordinance is like one line. It basically says you will adhere to your site plan, which is both great and not so great for us, right? So if there's a site plan on file, then it's great because my guys can go and pull that site plan and they can look at the picture of the site plan and they'd be like, well, this doesn't look like this. And they go, here you go. You need to make it look like this again because this is what your site plan is. If you want to modify or change it, go down and file a change and go through the process for that. And the problem we run into and where it becomes difficult is that over the time that we just haven't required people to make those modifications, or we've allowed people to just make modifications without putting anything on record. Or we have little snippets of, they can do this, and there's a note like on a piece of paper, and it's like they can leave a pad here, or like a concrete pad here. And those things become very difficult for us to really kind of dial back in as code enforcement. So over the last 2 years, myself and Mark have had to take a really kind of hard-nosed stance at certain things and say, no, listen, we're telling you that that's not gonna stand. You might have had something that 12 years ago they told you could do because you told them once upon a time you were gonna build a restaurant there a year later. Well, that year never came, that restaurant never came. It's time to convert it back to a vacant lot. And we do kind of get into this back and forth often with the other departments, and we try to work through that with both the property owners and the other departments, and try to lead that to a positive conversation of how do we just get to where we need so that there's not a blight issue going on. Either it gets to a vacant lot, or they choose to sell it to somebody who wants to develop it, or they develop it themselves. And the whole point is just to get it to a point where it's not impacting the surrounding properties.
Thank you, that's a great answer. Another, if you don't mind, just a couple more questions.
One more, then Big's got his, we're going to you, Big.
Sure. I'll make it a question that has duplicate, or two questions. How about that? My question is this. It's, I've noticed that there is a lot of leases that occur on the beach side. Now, knowing from business that we do in different states, anybody that leases a property usually has to register within the city and put their names and their driver's license and record that they're actually a resident of those homes. Is there a code that we have here in Daytona that enforces that?
So they're not required to, the tenant's not required to come down and register with us. Now, under our residential rental program, the landlord is required to have that information, and we can demand that of the landlord. And the landlord, and we've had to do that recently a couple of times. We've had some incidents. We've actually had to start sending some letters to some landlords and tell them, hey, you had an incident. I mean, you guys recall we had a police officer involved shooting on Piccadilly last month, and that was at there was 2 incidents over a 24-hour period at a landlord-owned house, and it was clearly a mismanaged landlord situation where the tenant was subleasing a property, and then they were getting into a back and forth about what being locked out of the house, not being locked out of the house, that kind of thing. So we sent a demand letter basically under our code saying you will correct this issue, or we will seek to suspend or revoke your license. And that's never really been a part of the code we've used before. But we also, in that same letter, well, actually, we sent it as a separate letter, but we also sent a separate letter demanding the things that we could under the law, which is a copy of the lease and a copy of the identification of the folks that he had on the lease. And those things, I think we got all that right, June. Which also, by the way, June Barnes, when we were doing the count, which is 16, by the way, because I counted it. Denzel's not here. It's 16 because I forgot to count June, who is the rental program coordinator. She supervises the 3 rental inspectors. She's in charge of that entire program. She's the supervisor for that. That was a new addition this last quarter. Or is this? Yeah, June, actually, previous quarter. Yeah. Big.
2 questions.
He's coming out swinging.
Your department has been in transition for a number of years. Is it almost done?
What? Oh, you mean like, are we done, like, all these changes we're doing?
You always are hiring new people and training people and this and that.
No. But what part of, I mean, you've been coming to these meetings for more than 3 years. You know exactly who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a big part of my program is self-improvement, right? So that flows over into the program. So the answer to your question is no. We will always be changing, we will always be growing, we will always be improving, we will always be identifying the parts of our program that are either failing or need to be improving.
I get.
Yeah, right. He told me he was going to come and swing tonight, so I'm ready.
Well, I had a code problem. I don't live in the city, but John was training Sarah on maybe her first day, and she just told me she's a 3-year veteran now. And so that's a pretty long time done, right?
Yes, it is.
My second question is, I think you're really strong on the mom and pops. And I think you're extremely weak on the corporate Americas. And I'm talking about the Americano and the La Playa. So I know that one of your youngsters was in charge of the Americano. I forget which one he is. You don't want to admit to it, do you, whoever you are?
It's Kevin, right? You got the Americano, right? Raise your hand. He's calling you out. It's okay.
Yeah, I know it's him, I know you.
Don't worry, you're not gonna have to answer the question. I got it.
So, you know, if you could get tougher on corporate America, I think that would be good.
So, your criticism is heard, not only by me, but it's heard by all of them. And they've all heard what I'm about to tell you, but they can hear it again. My philosophy pretty much when it comes to business owners is that they have a little bit more onus than probably residential owners do in the city because they're there to generate income, they're there to generate a profit, they know why they were there. A lot of running a business, maintaining a property was calculated in that decision to be there. So they have a responsibility to maintain those areas, and in that process, what my inspectors know is that when we cite a corporation, there's complications with that often, especially if it's a corporation that's outside of the area. I'll give you an example, not to pick on anybody, I'm just using one that everybody would know. So I'm picking randomly a corporation that everybody would know, Wawa, for example. So Wawa is a corporation that has stores all over the place, right? So you can imagine that a store owner probably needs to get money to be able to fix a problem if a problem arises, but he doesn't just have an unlimited budget that he can just access to be able to fix issues. So if we hit him with a letter and he can't get the attention of his boss to get that money, it makes it very difficult for him to correct the issue for us. So what I've often reminded them, because we've worked through this problem many times before as a team, is that when you send something to a corporate store, give them the appropriate time to fix the issue. But when you don't get a response and they've made no change, go ahead and proceed forward with the case quickly. Don't let it linger, because when it gets to that next level, when it gets to that hearing notice, that will end up at the district manager's office or the corporate folks that are running the property management section for that corporation, and they will get engaged in the problem. They will call a meeting, they will come down, and they will help that manager fix that issue.
What about the Americano and the LaPlaya?
I agree with you. There are problems, and we have a case on at least the Americano. I believe we have one on the La Playa, or no? The La Playa has the open permit. They're waiting on the glass, right?
Yeah, the Americano will be going before a hearing for the possibility of fines coming up next month.
So if you didn't hear that,
LaPlaya.
so okay. Well, I told you I'm gonna look into the La Playa for you. I'll take it and I'll go look into the La Playa for you. But what I will tell you is that I've been talking about the La Playa with other staff for months, and what I think is often unreasonable, and what people lose sight of, is that we give people 12, 14, 16 weeks to get like one window into a house. How many windows are they buying? How much glass are they buying?
Yeah, but I think they deserted the project.
Well, that's not what they're telling permits and licensing, and that's not what they're providing to them, and that's not what they're telling us.
I don't think.
Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm only as good as the information that's provided to me.
I don't think anybody's working on it.
Okay. Well, like I did say, you know I will. I've done it on everything you brought up here. I will look into
I'm
it.
not going away.
I know. I will look into it, and if it's falling to the wayside, we will address it.
Thank you.
Even though it's not our department that should.
Thank you.
John. Thank you.
We're having an issue with the time on Seabury, so going in Friday and Saturday morning, we watch what's happening on the street. And I just happened to check the parking lot in Wells Fargo. The trash building up, keep the kids out of the parking lot. So I happened to walk behind the Razzles property, and that's been ugly for 40 years. Weeds are growing like 10 feet high. They finally cleaned it all out and put it in gravel. It is really looking good. And on my drive over here, they just fenced in the IHOP dumpster, and that's been going on for like 4 weeks. So things are going on. That particular area is going up drastically. My neighbor just sold the house for $650,000. The one behind it is $595. There's one for $750. So the neighborhood is going up. The hotels are coming in. Hard Rock, Marriott, the Plaza's been purchased. So there is a movement to go up without help from the city. Now, the city has spent over $115 million in the last 5 years, and the beachside has gotten less than 1% of that. So we have to rely on you guys to bring up the area to compensate for what we're not getting from the city. Because these people are putting in mega bucks. I don't know how much the flat is going in, I hope it's a lot. 45. So we're going to have like four stars. The Russians have just opened up. We need concentration on that area. So if you could, for those, now, I know one guy can't do it all, if you could concentrate, those few things have been done. It's very noticeable. We've spoken about that tiny little lot that belongs to the Russians behind the pizza place. It's a hangout. It looks terrible. If we can just, behind Sussman's, that building looks terrible. So if we can concentrate on those things, it will help when those mega hotels go in, because those people will have money, and that area will change. But we have to help the businesses help us.
So this is why I like CodeStat, because number one, we can share, because I can tell you some information, you can tell me some information, but also the inspectors get to hear it not just from me. So they heard what you had to say, and the inspectors that have those cases, they know, what I expect from them, but now they also know what you expect from them. And Jonathan here, he's not just bought a hotel, he's been actively involved in that area. So those changes that you saw on Seabreeze, that's in part because of the conversations that he's gotten started, but it's also in part that for the work that these folks have done, because all those things you mentioned were as a result of code enforcement action that was taken against them. And in some cases, it was after repeated code enforcement action was taken against them when they continued to let the problems repeat or to linger again. So there's a lot of work to do in that area, and we're going to continue to work on that in the area. And it's going to be a slow crawl, and we have a plan for it. We really do. But it is an onion that when you peel, it's rough. Because we did one property a couple weeks ago, and it took us, I think we visited it 4 times over the course of 3 days. And when we finally got that out, we realized, okay, well, the neighboring property's gonna be the same way. We realized that it's all linear, it's all layered into each other. And it's just, we've got to pull it apart, and we realized, okay, we've got to involve all these other departments, which is also part of why the city manager wants to do these city tours. So you're gonna see that, and we're gonna stay on that, and we're gonna address those things, and we're on the same page with you. Every one of those things you talked about has cases on it, and they are working through. In fact, I think the lots behind the parking garage, the ones he talked about, the pizza place, are they about to go to hearing, or are they still in waiting for compliance? Okay. All right, any other questions before we just jump in? Yes, ma'am. I'm gonna, just so everybody knows, I'm doing District 1, and I'm doing it like super speed, because we had a lot of questions tonight. Good. Yes, ma'am.
Residential property where the tenant is really asking. The owner of the property, no, this that belongs to y'all. We don't know what. It's a residential property, so if you're.
I'll put it on the website.
I'm sorry. Ask the question again. I'm sorry.
We have a residential property in the neighborhood.
Okay.
They have a tenant.
Okay. Okay.
The tenant trashes the property. we've notified the owner of the property, and the owner has had conversations with the tenant, but because it's a residential property, that with nasty renter, she's having trouble getting the tenants out.
Okay, so I think the first problem is it's not a residential property, it's a rental property. And that's her problem to deal with, and that she needs to evict the tenant. If the tenant is breaking things, destroying things, any legal lease would have those things covered in it, and that those activities wouldn't be allowed. So she needs to take the appropriate action. It's not that she can't get them evicted, it's that she's not getting them evicted. So she needs to go through the proper procedures to get them evicted and have them out of the situation, repair the issues. Now, what I would tell you is if you're living next to that situation or around that situation and there's a violation occurring, or if you think maybe it's overdue for a rental inspection because it hasn't had one in 2 years, or maybe the rental license is expired because you looked it up online or something like that, you could report that violation to us, and that would initiate a complaint in which we would go and investigate and inspect the property, and that might help the situation resolve itself. Does that help answer the question? Sorry, that was fast. I'm trying to. It's getting late. And Ted wants to go home. And like 5 people said they would need to talk to me after this, so. All right, we're moving. Issue 1. All right, first up is Roosevelt Bettler. And for those who don't know Roosevelt, wave. Can you wave for him? There he is. All right. Go ahead. So Roosevelt opened 101 cases during the quarter. 90% of those are residential properties because he has mostly residential neighborhoods where he focuses on that area. 10% of those cases were commercial properties. Next slide. So he has, looks like 4 that, number doesn't seem right, but 4, this is commercial properties. Sorry, 4 that are unassigned right now, 4 that are exterior structure problems, 1 that's an exterior property, and 1 that is a vehicle issue for commercial properties. Next slide. Residential properties, 13 of them are not categorized. 6 of them are work without permits. 8 are exterior structure. 1 is interior structure. And 35, which is a pretty common category for exterior property. That, just so you know, exterior property is like landscaping, outside storage, these types of things that don't have anything to do with the structure, but would be outside visible on the property. Next slide. 28 vehicles, sorry. Of those cases open, 61 of them were complaint driven and 40 of them were field generated. He closed 105 cases. 52 of those cases that he closed were open and closed in the same month or same quarter. And of those cases that he closed, 75 of them closed in compliance. 27 of them closed unfounded, and 2 of them closed compliance after finding, which again means they went to a hearing, and 1 of them closed after receiving a lien. Okay, Rosal, you got to do this part. I'm sorry. I don't know the backstory. I didn't plan that well.
This is the 1127 Edith. On that street, this particular gentleman here had some exterior dirt and grime in an area that he hadn't painted. He explained to me he let it go for like a couple of years, but he appreciated me bringing it to his attention. And he told me that he wouldn't let me down because his word was his bond. And as you can see, the after effect, definitely he was a man of his word. It's beautiful, great work.
He had the rock on there, right? I like that.
It's like a siding.
Oh, it's like a siding. Well, it looks like faux rock. Looks good.
Okay, this particular property, this is Wesley Street, and this was given to me by none other than my supervisor, Mr. Mark Jones. This property had been like this for a while. I would say at least 2 or 3 years, where people would go on this site and just dump stuff out there. After talking to the owner, and I don't want to bear the time, but the owner told me that didn't belong to him. And he showed me a phone with 19 attorneys. So like I was gonna back off because he showed me 19 attorneys. But I was assured by doing my homework, and I was confident that that was his.
So I had to go to pictometry, property appraisal, those different areas, and do my homework. Took it to him and showed him that storage dock and the effect of me being right. He cleaned everything up. That's that.
Was that a situation where it was clearly on his parcel?
Yes.
Or did it end up being like a button?
No, it was actually on his parcel.
All right,
So I
great.
had to show him the diagram that
And that's what people forget a lot of times. There's a lot of back-end research that the inspectors have to do. They have to go and they get challenged about stuff all the time, and they have to go back and fact-check stuff. So often have to confer with the city attorneys and get information. You know, that's an example. It's just extra back-end work that people don't really account for. Next slide. Next slide. Mike Fitzgerald is the next inspector. Mike, he opened 74 cases for the third quarter. 89% of those were residential properties, 10% of those were commercial properties, and 1% of those was vacant lots. Next. For the commercial properties, 4 of those are uncategorized. 1 is exterior structure, and 2 is exterior property. Sorry. Residential property, 16 of those are uncategorized, 5 are without permit, 24 are exterior structure, which is the most common probably category out of all. 3 is interior structure, 12 is exterior property, 6 is vehicles. 74 cases he opened, 33 were complaint driven, and 41 were field generated. Mike also closed 76 cases. 7 cases were opened and closed in the same quarter. Of those 76 that he closed, 60 he closed in compliance. These numbers, oh, they're right, yeah. 60 closed in compliance, 7 closed unfounded, 4 closed compliance after finding, 3 closed duplicate, 1 closed other, and 1 closed after a lien. Mike.
Just a 606 Washington. It was a building that had no one living in it for about 5 years. An investor came in, purchased it, pulled permits, redid the entire house, and it looks great.
Sarah Kirk is our next inspector. Sarah has 85 cases that she opened during the quarter. 70% of those are residential properties, 26 are commercial properties. 26% are residential properties, 2% were vacant lots, and then 2% were department referrals. For the commercial properties, 8 of them were unassigned. 1 was life safety, 1 was work without permits, 3 were exterior structure, 4 were interior structure, and 5 were exterior property. For residential, 7 were uncategorized, 4 were life safety, 4 were work without permit, 9 were exterior structure, 27 were exterior property, and 8 were vehicles. Of the 85, 52 were complaint driven, and 34 were field generated. You had a lot of complaints. It seems like, well, I think we talked about that last time. You seem to be getting a lot more complaints lately, which is like the oddball. She closed 80 cases during the quarter. 28 were open and closed in the same quarter. Of the 80 that were closed, 59 were in compliance, 12 unfounded, 6 compliance after finding, 1 forwarded to PD, 1 forwarded to Public Works, and 1 closed after a lien.
This is 602 El Dorado. It's on the corner of South Martin Luther King Boulevard, Midtown. He did a lot of work, made it look really nice for Midtown. This is 613 Cedar Park. The house I thought looked great. They've been doing a lot of work on this street. It's really looking great in Cedar Park. And this is 640 Orange. It was an eyesore for quite a while. Looks a lot better now.
And this one, like years ago, had a fire, and then the guy bought it, and he tried to rehab it, kind of got himself in over his head. and I think he got a fine on himself, right? And then for work without a permit, is that what it was?
Correct.
Yeah, then he ended up, somebody bought it and they rehabbed it, kind of finished it off to that, and it looks amazing compared to what it was. Next up is John Stenson. John's been hard at work. This quarter's got 84 cases that he opened. 65 of them are residential property, or 65%. 29% were commercial property. 5% were city department referrals. That's mainly because he gets a lot of junk vehicle calls in his area. 1% were vacant lots. Of the commercial properties, 8 were no subtype, 1 was life safety, 1 without permits, 2 for exterior structures, 1 for interior structures, and 10 for exterior property. That's going to be his probably #1 category all the time. That's his biggest complaint, I think, down there. People are always calling about landscape issues, mainly because he has some of the HOAs and older kind of HOA neighborhoods down there. He has the area kind of south end, west side of the city, like Pelican Bay, Fairway Estates, that kind of area. Vehicles, he has 1 for that category. Residential properties, it's 9 for no category, 1 for life safety, 4 for work without permits, 12 for exterior structure, 21 for exterior property, and 8 for vehicles. Of the 84 cases, 41 were complaint driven and 43 were field generated. 88 cases were closed during the quarter. 31 of them were closed and open and closed during the same quarter. Of the ones he closed, 54 were in compliance. 11 were compliance after finding. 11 were unfounded. 5 were with a lien. 3 were reported to PD. 2 were will find and 2 were other. John Roosevelt, I think Mark, are the closest inspectors to achieving what we call our 90-day goal, which is where they're working cases in about a 90-day cycle. And that's why their caseload is a little bit smaller than everybody's, because they're pushing cases through faster. And that's why you'll see his lien number was a little higher, because he's actually getting some cases through the process of start to finish before the quarter's over, because he's trying to achieve that almost unattainable goal of completing a case in a 90-day window of time. And it really is almost unattainable, because when you have to wait for the mail and all these other things that we've talked about tonight. Any questions about District 1? Oh, great, we just saved them all for District 2. That was great. I like when that happens. That's okay.
It's still here, I get it.
No. It's okay. Let's talk about vacant lots real quick. We're almost done. Vacant lots, Danny Garcia, he's our vacant lot inspector. Flip over to the next slide, please. This pie chart should really be all vacant lots, but it's 99% vacant lots and 1% the city department referral. He opened 124 cases. This slide is the subtypes for vacant lots, and he has a lot more subtypes than everybody else, because it's possible you would have a vacant lot violation with just like 1 violation, 1 particular violation, and we have it kind of tapered down to what violations could occur on that vacant lot for him, just to kind of make it a little bit easier. We're trying to make this process quick so he can move through his cases quickly. It's not completely refined. We are working on this. We want to improve it because we want it to be quick and actionable. Right now, he's got 70 cases for this quarter sitting in an unassigned subtype category. The other one is 52, which is the multiple violations category, which we just find right now, because the lots have just over years gotten out of control, that almost every lot he goes to has more than 1 violation. And that's probably going to be the case for the most part, because we have talked to him about pretty rigorously, not just, even if they just have a grass issue, making sure that he addresses the abutment issue too, because often they're not addressing the edging of the sidewalk and cleaning up along the roadway. So we've been making sure that he includes both of those violations, so we're working on him to improve that project. And then he has just like a one-off there that's like a fence wall, and they just have that like one weird violation there. Next slide. So of these cases, 76 were complaint driven and 48 were field generated. 64 cases he closed during the quarter. During that quarter, he opened and closed 23 of those cases. And you can see this graph looks a little different. This just has some things on there that everybody else would have. Actually, this didn't get updated. I'm sorry about that, guys. Disregard this stuff. Well, actually, I don't know, it may be accurate, we just didn't go back and check it. So I'm gonna apologize for that one. It's just part of the cleanup. Next slide. Go ahead, Danny.
Okay, so this lot is on Fairview between Beach Street and Ridgewood. And as you can see on the left, there was a vacant lot that was overgrown. Had a shed there with a roof that was rusted. And an issue with transients that were hanging around the back of it. And so we had an owner that was out of state, and it's hard to get a hold of, but we sent him to the hearing and got contact, and he then turned around and decided on demolishing the shed, which would bring it into compliance and also taking care of the grass. Totally on the right. This one is on Jefferson Street. It's a lot that was slightly overgrown, but had an issue with debris and a lot of dumping there. And issued a notice to the owner where I had contact with him and had him remove the debris, getting hold of Sandra Vancouver with the city solid waste, making arrangements to get all that removed. This is on south east corner of B Street in Madison, where we had a building that was
Southwest.
Southwest, where they had transient issues, had building was unsecure, we had graffiti issues on the other side, overgrowth of grass and trash and debris and whatnot, and got a hold of the owner. It's a long process. We took it to the hearing. We got a running day fine, maxed out the fine of $15,000, and turned around and decided on putting a permit and demolishing the building, taking care of all the issues.
All right, June, you want to quickly go through this? Oh man, I didn't even read your section. I mean, I read it like 2 weeks ago.
Okay, there are currently 1,701 rental licenses that are active, which is up from 1,588 last quarter, which tells me that these guys are out there writing up people for not having a rental license. All licenses must be renewed annually. Inspections for properties with less than 4 units are mandatory every 2 years for renewal. We completed 131 inspections, 35 passed, 89 failed, so 67% are still failing, and we're working on that. The rental reinspection, they've completed 159. Actually, 109 have passed now, 47 have failed, so we're really doing much better on that by providing information in advance. So overall, for all the inspections conducted in the second quarter, 46% are failing now.
Yeah, so we made some massive, we kind of got another part of the program pulled over for permits licensing. We talked about that before, and with it became this other position that June has filled, supervising the program, and what the licensing part came over. So we're discovering all these different things about the licensing side of it that were kind of messed up and kind of just need to be fine-tuned, and we're working on that. But as we work through that, what we've identified is that the inspection numbers are really more of an accurate reflection of what the rental inspectors do on a day-to-day basis. They do have caseloads that they carry, but it's a lot lower than these folks because they're often inspecting folks that are just coming in for their annual renewals, and they have to do that on top of finding cases for people who aren't complying with the the law as well. And as we looked at inspections, we realized there's percentages of failures, and we now are going to keep continuing to track that because we're going to work to try to improve that. We're implementing a new scheduling program for inspections, which has better communication with the customer. It uses like an online platform that has notifications, including email notifications and text notifications to the customer that allows for them to get prompts reminding them of their upcoming inspection. And with that reminder comes some of the reminders like, hey, these are the things that people commonly forget about. Batteries in their smoke detectors, make sure everything's in there before we show up. Screens in your windows, the things that people just end up failing at the last minute, and it causes us another trip out. So we're just trying to kind of take care of that stuff on the front end. Next slide. Okay, so LaWanda opened 44 cases. She closed 57 cases in the quarter. 17 of those were complaint-driven. 4 of them came as CRM, which is complaint-driven as well, and 23 were field-generated, which is that's actually quite a bit of field-generated. That's good. Good.
57 cases.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I thought I got it. Okay, go ahead. Perfect.
And it's
And then Stephen opened 31 cases during the quarter, and he closed 98 cases during the third quarter. He's been working on knocking off a lot of these old cases that passed from Mark from 2020 down to him from when we did that big push of finding the folks based on the property appraiser's information. And the ones that were open, 12 of them were complaint-driven or citizen-driven, 16 total were complaint-driven, and 15 were field-generated. Cliff is a short-term rental inspector, so his cases are all short-term rental. He opened 27 cases. He closed 76 cases during the quarter, and of those 27 cases, 4, I'm going to add that together, 11 were complaint-driven and 16 were field-generated. So since January 2021, 68 cases for short-term rentals have been brought before the special magistrate. Those cases appearing before the special magistrate have resulted in a total of fines amounting in $246,526. This process has been a huge change for us. We have learned over the course of about a year and a half what the magistrate is really willing to fine people for, and the amount of fines he's willing to give. And we have gotten to a point where we have been able to tailor our cases to present the facts that he's looking for as far as what he would really realistically fine somebody for. And what that's allowed us to do is to not have to come in and just always ask for $15,000. Because at the beginning, the city wanted us to ask for the maximum fine, and we didn't know what the magistrate would do, so we just walk in and ask for $15,000. And what we learned over time is what he was willing to give $1,000 for, $5,000 for, $10,000 for, and $15,000 for. So as we build our cases, we realize, okay, this one's probably going to be a $10,000 case based on the facts. We prepare our case just based on the facts, and we come in and we present it. And as the other side presents their case, the magistrate is making a decision based on our facts and their facts. And what we found is it's cut the hearing times down because the magistrate's a lot closer to a number that's realistic for him, so he's having to debate a lot less things while he's up there. Does that make sense? I've seen some head nods for the 2 or 3 remaining people. Any questions for the rental program?
I have one more thing to add, if you'll let me.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
So we have an intern from Embry-Riddle who has been working with us in the rental department, and Captain Lee and him have put together a way for people who need to schedule their inspections to be able to do it on their own. So hopefully sometime next year we'll have that up and running, and it's going to be. But Captain Lee's put a lot of work, and so is Jacob Levine, so.
I'm pretty sure that she said that publicly so that we have to do it. Because right now, it works internally, and we're going to start it, I think next week internally. But yes, our goal is to hopefully get it publicly so that people can just start scheduling with the inspectors. Yes, it is very exciting. It'll save a lot of workload, a lot of unnecessary communication both for the customer and for the city as well. All right. Thank you everyone for coming out. Is that it? Thank you, Our Lady of Lourdes, again for hosting us. As always, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Oh, the pop unit. I forgot about the pop unit. I feel bad. The pop unit during this time, they made 33 arrests. They wrote 76 reports. They executed 31 search warrants. They did 51 sex offender and career offender checks. They've been instrumental in the SMART program, so they've been focused on that. So that this is a description of what the SMART program is. I'm not going to go into it. We talk about it in every community meeting for the last 5 months, I think. And I will tell you that the pop unit's focus has started to switch to, we've been applying a lot of the offender-based policing and looking at career offenders and who's still getting out of jail and re-offending. And that's a lot of what they're doing, and assisting patrol with improving their cases for folks that re-offended in the middle of the night, and because of patrol not having the resources in the middle of the night, might not have been able to make the best case. So we've been helping them on the back end, just kind of apply some follow-up to just improve those cases. And we're seeing a lot of lasting results. We're looking forward to telling you guys more about that in the future. Again, thank you everybody. Thank you inspectors. I'm sorry to hold you guys up. I'm sorry it was so late. Get out of here. And the next meeting will be a year review. It'll be January 18th, 6:30 p.m. I don't know the location yet. I think Denzel's worked it out that we're going to be in Zone 5. Yeah. Well, I want to go. We're trying to bounce between the districts. So, and I know Zone 5 had asked us about coming over there, so we're trying to go over there. That's our hope. We will announce the location and let you guys know. Thank you again, everyone. Appreciate it. Oh, thank you, Joe. Where's Joe? Joe, there he is. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for recording everything and setting everything up and always being like the last guy out, first guy here. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.